Hey everyone, welcome back to your favorite sales and revenue podcast. I'm your host, Ross Rich, and we have a special guest today. We're joined by Dustin Deno, who is the CRO of Affinity, and very excited to have him on here to talk about a bit of a different episode. We're going to talk about everyone's favorite topic, which is comp, but not just that, but how to use that in a strategic way to drive incentives, business outcomes, and transparency across the revenue organization. So, welcome, Dustin.
Thanks, Ross. Really excited to chat with you today.
Awesome. Well, before we get into the heart of it, maybe to get to know you a little bit, but always curious to hear folks' path to revenue leadership. I know most kids don't grow up thinking about either being an astronaut or a sales leader. So curious to hear how you kind of, stumbled your way into sales and revenue leadership.
Yeah. Coming out of university, I did what some people do and start to work for the family business. And the logical path there was to help grow the family business. It was a manufacturing business, so a lot different than what I do today, but might be a reason why I'm enjoy process so much. But yeah, got into to help growing the family business, and then one of the things that helped us grow the family business was using technology and Salesforce in particular. And
Mm.
when I decided I didn't want to kind of take over the family business forever, I was really excited about technology, and so I took a chance to go work at Salesforce as a seller, and very quickly got really excited about sales leadership there, and working with some of the great mentors, which I know you're friends with and colleagues with as well. And yeah, so really became obsessed with driving teams and performance, and was an athlete in college, and so that kind of competitive drive and nature combined with the business. And then I'd say being put in an environment like Salesforce where you're around so many great talented people is something that yeah, and now I'm here. So that's kind of how it was born, I see.
That's very cool. I didn't know we had that in common in terms of yeah, family manufacturing businesses, but luckily, my dad spared me of that and went down another random path with the music industry, but that's for another time. But it's interesting that you were actually a user before joining. I think that's a very common theme that I've seen from people that have been lucky enough to be very early on at some of these great companies is they happen to be a user and kind of see that spark and experience it themselves and end up being a part of the ride.
Yeah, for sure. It was game changing. Like I kind of got it to keep my like sales lists and email lists together, and then ended up using dashboards to really transform the way we did kind of projects at the company. And yeah, I kind of got addicted to being like an admin and just hacking away at different problems. And yeah, next thing you know, you're you're very passionate about the technology, and so I was fortunate enough that Salesforce was growing pretty quickly in the region. So yeah, it was good.
Awesome. Well, we'll fast forward a few years from then, and before we get into some of this incentive structure stuff that I'm really excited to share with the community, what do you think the most challenging part of running a revenue organization is today?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I you know the revenue is always changing, but there's also so much of it's staying the same at the same time. And so how do you continue to evolve with the space, but also stay true to the things that really drive results? I think
Mhm.
especially in technology, we can chase certain things that are new and shiny objects, so to speak. So I think that from a high level, and then what I've seen is talent wins the day, and so I spend a lot of energy and time focused on people, and how can I build a competitive yet collaborative culture where people feel like they're growing and learning quite a bit. And so it's there's no finish line in that job, so that's why I say it's challenging, but it's also extremely rewarding when you see people grow their careers or people continue to work for you at other companies. Like that's, I think, probably both the most rewarding and challenging thing, because like I said, the job's never done there. And then I think the the markets change every year, and you got to like adapt to the new environment. And so it's this constant balance of uh the ground beneath you is constantly shifting, but yet there's some, still tried and true, consistent things that'll always work. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, it's that balance, but it's a lot of fun, right? If it was all the same job every day, I think that's part of what attracts us to revenue, and particularly in tech. Yeah,
Totally. Yeah, I think if I were to summarize what I heard is everything starts and stops with talent, and people management for the good and bad of it is always the most challenging. And then, market, people and market, those are always, I think, kind of summing up everything is, the most fun and rewarding, but also the most challenging part of the job, right?
for sure, for sure.
Awesome. Cool. This is gonna be a bit of a different one. We're going to move away from some of the kind of tactical deal execution pieces, and we're going to kind of zoom out and talk about a few different topics. I was really excited for this one. You kind of walked me through some of your philosophy around this, and really excited to share this on the pod. And if I were to summarize it, kind of three different high level topics, then I'll let you do the talking, Dustin. But we're going to talk about a bit of the incentive structures to match business objectives, how to orient that around responsible, predictable growth, more important than ever right now, and driving transparency, going back to talent across the revenue organization, so everyone feels like there's a lot of kind of fairness to it. So yeah, I'll kind of pass the mic off to you, and really excited to dig into this.
So yeah, I do have that kind of manufacturing kind of engineering mind. And so heading into the year, and by the way, this is not something that I invented. I've kind of taken from Mark Roberge and several other people that I thought and kind of put together an amalgamation of it that it's been successful for us this year. But heading into the last year, we obviously saw the signs of okay, we need to be responsible about how we're thinking about the next year. This idea of kind of growth at all costs, or let's back into our revenue goal, throw it in an Excel spreadsheet, and then like extract how many reps that equals, and let's just go hire a bunch of people. You saw a bunch of layoffs, and I just never really got behind the idea that that was the best way to do it. I grew up in this very low margin manufacturing business, and then you get to SaaS and with valuations and free money, and the growth is really the only thing that matters. And I saw that kind of changing, and we as a company saw it changing. And so I thought, how can we align the business to that new world?
Mhm.
And then secondarily, I thought, I spent a lot of time, focused on career advancement for the team. And um, I didn't want to have those conversations anymore. I wanted a lot of transparency within the organization, and drive and reward uh, consistent performance, and the things that I wanted to reward
Mhm.
with kind of automatic career advancement if certain things were happening. And then um, you know so we implemented a kind of multi-prong approach around incentives that over the last year has been really, really helpful for us as a company. And really it's got a couple areas to it. But what I found is we had three segments in the business. We had a growth business, a mid-market business, and what we call our strategic segments. And those are really the different types of account executives that sell into different size organizations of our customers. And so I thought, how can I drive consistency of performance, the consumption of all the enablement, and then also kind of make it so it drives itself almost.
Mhm.
Big task. But what we decided to do is within each one of those segments, create three different roles. So think of like AE1, AE2, AE3 in each segment. And so then we said, okay, like what are we looking for them to do? And we want them to drive consistency of performance. I didn't want like a rep doing 400% of their number 1 month and then like 10% the next. It's driving that really consistent book of business that drives that predictability. But then I also
Mhm.
want them to learn and consume enablement, because enablement had just come from Showpad. We're an enablement company. Like driving that adoption enablement has always been a struggle in SaaS businesses. And
Mhm.
so how do I do both? And so what we did is we tied their career to it. And so in our business, depending on the segment, if you hit your number multiple periods in a row and you consume the enablement, you automatically get promoted that next period. And we found that it's a really effective incentive for people to advance their career. But then secondly, what we did is, if you have AE1, AE2, and AE3, we designed the enablement for each one of those roles. So if if you're an A1, you get enablement that's about how to do the job. So like could be as basic as like how you navigate the CRM, how you use all the tools, who's our ICP, very like in depth, but also basic kind of here's where the bathroom is type
Yeah.
of training and enablement. And then once you graduate to AE2, it's how to master the job. And that's where we take some of the really the strong best practices from the top AEs that have been doing it very consistently. Um, some more detailed approach around how you do discovery, some more detailed approach around how we demo and how we
Mhm.
solution to our customers. And so that's how they master the role. And then the last, so if you make it to AE3, very quickly, your training and enablement is focused on how to do the next job. So that's how do you go up market, right? Essentially.
Mhm.
And so this allowed us to take a lot of the content and training and enablement that we do and put it into buckets, and then they have to consume it and they have to pass it and or in order to get promoted. So the engagement went kind of through the roof on that training. So that was really about the automatic promotion path is created that incentive for the rep to drive consistency, but also the consumption of the learning, which has also helped in their performance and our ability to execute. So that's kind of the first part of the framework. Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe just before we get into the next one, because I think there's a lot of good stuff in there. And even hearing it the second time, I'm starting to pull out a few different pieces that I feel like I missed. I think, you know, the first piece, what does growth look like in a role? My experience is typically that rubric,
Mhm.
and it's very subjective, right? And that's the first piece that I missed is like how objective this becomes. Where am I? And you own it, right? This isn't how someone else thinks. And that was always the most frustrating thing, thing in my perspective, I'm sure before, kind of being the CRO role, like any leader from, the VP level, director, IC, you're not always on the same page. And you see what you're doing is different than your manager, and just bring that down to like, I'm consuming this stuff and I'm consistently hitting
Yep.
my targets. That's it. And sometimes it takes up so much mind share from yourself as a rep or as the leader, right? I kind of miss that part. And I think that's kind of the beauty of some of this stuff, right?
Yeah, it really, really does help. And then there's other elements that help you. But, when we started as an industry, when we started over hiring and growth at all costs matter, we got in a world where performance wasn't the only input on whether someone got promoted because 40% of reps were hitting their number or so 50 like whatever number you want to use. And so then we
Mm-hmm.
start to use these things that aren't really black and white to to kind of grade and like you said this rubric that became to me incredibly confusing and difficult to look someone in the eye and say they weren't doing this right or they weren't doing that right because we all know in sales there's a lot of ways to kind of skin this cat so to speak. So like I was I really struggled with that. And so it really put a box around that and was extremely transparent. The other element of this is on the downside.
Mm-hmm.
So, while we reward that consistent achievement of hitting your target and you get promoted very quickly if you do those things, I also found the opposite of the opposite situation where you have someone that's underperforming. I was always really I didn't really like the idea that we waited until someone underperformed for a really long period of time before we actually swarmed and helped them. And it wasn't even to help them. It was like, how are we going to make their world so hard so that they leave? Or
Yeah.
we, and so we have the opposite framework as well. So if a rep dips below 60% in a period, we call what we have a swarm. So we like immediately go to help where there's things that I have to do tied to that rep. So I help them all the way down the chain, and enablement kind of swarms them. Their frontline manager obviously swarms them to help identify where they need to improve to drive performance again
Mm-hmm.
and or drive performance the other way. And so we've also kind of flipped that on its head. Instead of like waiting 6 months of underperformance, let's nip it right in the bud. out of the gate and really assign responsibility to the whole leadership team. And that's been very, very helpful as well as to kind of um, you know, the reps really enjoy it because it's not this, because you can't get in a world where it's like, oh, if the only thing you do is the only way you can be successful at your company is if you like crush your number every period. We all know
Mhm.
that's not realistic, right? And so, but I also know that we kind of leave reps on an island sometimes if, the performance dips for a little bit, and the next thing you know, you're 6, 9, 12 months later, and um, that reps disengage because they're frustrated, they're not hitting their number, they're seeing other reps
Yeah.
around them get promoted multiple
And
times.
confidence is so important. That's what I'm thinking of, right? Is like after that quarter, like you're like, it's objective. You have the dashboard. Like you come and rally around them, you can lose, like you're saying, lose confidence, disengage. Maybe you're like, oh, maybe it's just if I'm selling another thing or doing another job, and yeah, all of a sudden another couple quarter goes by, and you lose all those leads and deals that this rep could be, potentially closing, right?
100%. I mean, I've never seen a rep never not miss a quota one period. Like it happens,
Yeah.
right? And so, but what you don't want to do is it's like a very slippery slope where they miss once, and then if they miss another time, the next thing you know, like they start to really question A, whether they're doing the right things, or B, this is the right place for them. And so yeah, it's a and yeah, again, with that kind of like operational engineering mindset, I was trying to like, how do I engineer this so that we don't have to have those terrible conversations? And it's yeah, it's worked out so far. Mm.
Awesome. And then there was another upside component to it, maybe bring it back to some of the positives
Yep.
around the management team, which I thought was really, really interesting, especially around this responsible, predictable growth.
Yep.
So moving up a level from kind of that rep to the manager, if you want to talk through how you thought about resourcing managers that were kind of exceeding as a leader.
Yeah, so the if you just did the kind of automatic promotion and high level performance there on the rep side, you could get in a place where you don't have enough capacity to grow, right? Because one way to drive really good performance across the board is to, just keep your team small enough. And if you have a good business, you'll actually like feed a lot of reps, or, feed a low number of reps with a lot of business. So we're like, how do we incentivize this capacity that we need as a team to obviously drive growth, but do it in a responsible way? And
Mhm.
so what we did is look at the incentive structure for a sales leader. And when we set our targets for the year, everyone has a team of 7 to 9 reps, just like most organizations do. And we said, okay, like what are the things that we want to to get out of the manager? We want them to drive consistent performance, not only consistent performance period over period, but we want them to drive consistent performance across their team. Because I saw a lot of teams that would have like, 2 or 3 people that did 200% of their number, and then the rest of this team is kind of lagging behind, and that consistently happened. So how do we drive consistency across the team and consistency across the calendar? And then how do we really, really incentivize coaching and performance management in a way that um, isn't like the 10th thing on the list of their job, right? How do you
Yeah.
put it front and center for them to really drive? So they're not just chasing deals and kind of playing whack-a-mole. They're building a consistent engine. And so what we did is implement an incentive structure for them where if they get 80% of the reps that they have on their team above 80% of the quota, and they hit their number, and they do it within a pipeline mix that is consistent of our business within a range, they get a free head. So they can hire someone and it doesn't hit their quota. So if you had 7 reps and $1 million target, and your target for the year was 7 million bucks, if you get through your first quarter and you've gotten your whole team above 80%, you've hit your number, and the pipeline mix is right, you can hire a person that next month, and your quota doesn't go up at all. So my target gets bigger as the organization grows and the capacity goes, but that one specific manager, and
Mhm.
that's a hard task to do, to get all of your people above 80%. So like once we started modeling out for finance, because they were originally worried about it, like if you get 80% of your team at 80% of the number and the pipeline mix is right and they're the teams at their overall quota, you actually need more capacity.
Hmm.
And so it's a very good barometer. And then I've always said that like 80% was our number, but like let's just say you want to grow faster and a little bit less responsively, just lower that number. Like that's the lever that you have. So if
Yeah.
you want to say 80% at 70 or 70% at 80, like you can then play with that number, but it gives you a very, very tight, and you don't have to go back and have these discussions with finance around, can we get the head? Like you actually need it. And so
Hmm.
the other benefits of that is like we actually grew where we needed to grow. Instead of me applying like headcount across all different segments, we saw some segments grow better than others, and that's where the business was, and that's where it made a lot of sense. And then we also saw like managers just intensely focused on performance management and coaching. And so because they had to give everybody above the watermark, they weren't just chasing that big deal or that one rep that had the big pipeline that quarter.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so it that really, really helped kind of put everything together for the incentive structure that's been, driving that responsible growth, so to speak. Yeah.
So, well, just to pause there for a second, you said something that was really interesting, which is, this helped the business understand the certain segments that, needed to grow the most. How much of this came down, though, to the execution of those managers and those particular reps versus the market? Like that's something I'm always really, really interested in
Yeah.
is like, could you have the best team ever sell a product that doesn't make sense for the market and absolutely nail it relative to the worst sellers and sales team out there with a great product? Like, how have you seen this play out in the last year?
Yeah, it definitely like one of my best sales managers was, he got two or three extra heads because, he drives performance and he drives consistent performance across his team. And then you may have another segment that could be struggling for other reasons. But then what happens is you'll see, um, just like reps are very focused on identifying what rep on the team is doing certain things and going and like trying to mirror that behavior. We saw that across our leadership team. It's like, well, like what is he doing?
Mm.
Right. And then you start to see that best practice focus on across like coaching and performance management really get extended across the board. And it kind of was the tide that rose all boats because you know you could see another manager like if you're a group of sales leaders and one of your peers is like crushing their number, typically the sentiment there is that like they've executed on some big deals really well, or they've had a whopper deal that happened that like
A
got,
bluebird came through early in the quarter, and yeah,
there's not like this notion that like, oh, what they're doing is something that I'm going to replicate, right? But
yeah.
here you have to drive consistency across their team. So they're like it's a clear like sales leadership, like it's a sales leadership execution thing that's happening where you can get everybody above a threshold. Like there's you either need capacity because your business is growing and it's on fire, and that's why you're adding all these heads, or the sales leader is doing a really, really good job, and so it created that kind of, oh, like um, you know this person's doing this, I should probably go replicate it. And we just saw the coaching and performance management really go through the roof.
And how has that impacted the responsibility and ownership around hiring and firing for those frontline managers? Because that's something that we've always seen, um, you know, maybe feel like a company thing and not the manager's responsibility. Whereas, like, if you need 80% of your team to be hitting 80% of the number, you can't have someone who isn't able to do that, right? So how have you seen that change things?
That's the perfect question to ask here, because that's the other thing that we saw that I didn't really have like an intention of solving, is the bar for
Yeah.
hiring really goes up, right? Because they know that if this person's a laggard on their team, it's going to be very difficult for them to get any additional capacity and overachieve on their number. And so they spend a lot more time up front, making sure that this person um, can drive. So yeah, we've seen like for instance, in our strap business, we had kind of changed the whole team and started over, and like the numbers in Q4 for that strap business were through the roof, and they were all ramping reps, but they had like they were all rock stars, right? And so the hiring has been drastically improved because you're not running into this like, because if you have a capacity model like we used to do it, like back
You
in
fill a seat. Your job is to fill a seat.
the job is literally like it's actually the wrong incentive because it really incentivizes poor hiring.
Yep.
Yeah, that's been a really, I can't say I had enough foresight to know that that was going to happen, but it was one of those unintended consequences that worked out for us. Yeah.
That's super interesting. And then maybe to wrap things up, so we've talked a lot about the reps, we've talked a lot about the frontline managers. What about, for that second line or someone for like yourself? How has this kind of changed your perspective around how to run revenue teams? Yeah, kind of curious to some of those unintended consequences you might have learned.
Yeah, like what I found is I had no more of those conversations around, oh, we got to promote, Billy because he's been here for 9 months and like he's hit his number. And then I like the constant conversation between like, finance, we got to promote this person or fitting it into some like merit cycle that the people team puts together for you. Like we were allowed to run the business and were rewarded for running it effectively through growth that was measured and responsible. And so I found my stress level went down quite a bit because it's kind of optimized. And then the second thing that it did for me is like it allowed me to zero in very, very quickly on the segments of the business or the teams that weren't performing.
Mm,
So if you saw if someone hadn't gotten a free head or if the team wasn't growing or the attainment wasn't there, let's dig into that business, right? And for instance, we had a mid-market business that wasn't getting the traction, and that wasn't a sales leadership problem or a rep problem. We actually had an ICP disconnect. So it allowed us to really zoom in on the business problem that was causing the performance, because
mhm.
when you have like a bunch of you've hired a bunch of heads and you're growing like crazy, you don't know whether it's like the person, the rep, the sales leader, right? But it can it narrows your focus on where the business problem is a lot faster than I typically saw. And then my I can say like as a bit of advice is you got to get that the whole leadership team kind of bought in on it. That was we were really fortunate to have that, and I can't imagine because it does take a lot of people to kind of get it off the ground, and then once you do, if people aren't bought in on it, it can be probably a detractor. But that was the
Yeah,
other lesson I learned is getting everybody behind it was really helpful for us.
totally. Yeah, there's everything from the people team to finance to the board and all this kind of stuff. So I'm sure there was a lot of work. And
Yep.
then the last question before we get into some of the rapid fire questions here, and then you get back to it. But why don't more teams do this? Like this is all this stuff just seems to make a lot of sense. And there are a lot of you can say like, oh, maybe companies have different segments or need different people, but like there's a lot of businesses that do and should look like affinities.
Yep. Yeah,
Why is this not a thing that I know of that we've been talking about for the last decade?
yeah, I think I mean there's a pretty big regime change because around this growth at all costs and also like shifting towards responsible growth. I think, you know, I mean, there's been multiple times in my career I've been rewarded through, you know, hitting targets and by hiring 100 people in a year. Like that's that's extremely risky to a long-term business. I don't care what business you're in. Like to say that you're going to do that with really high success rate over a long period of time is very, very, I think, unlikely. And so
Mhm.
I think the kind of boards and executives were pushing people to hire ahead and when software was a land grab and there wasn't, you know, a million companies selling software, that might have worked, right? And I know it worked at the early days of Salesforce. It was like we just needed more people on because it was
In the
literally a
phones,
land
yeah.
grab, right? Now that whole world's changed. So I think it's the shift in kind of mindset of boards and executives that is really important. And then um, yeah, like me personally, I just wanted to engineer it, and I think there's not a like you know some of the people like Kale and Tully and Daryl, your VP of sales or head of sales is operationally minded, right? I think the new there's either like the old school sales leaders that are love the deal and are more glorified sales managers and love flying around and closing big deals, and then there's the operational leader. Like I think you're going to see um, the shift in kind of revenue leadership towards that kind of operational focus, and you'll probably see it more. We tried a new thing and it ended up working out, and it's driving a lot of efficiency, but yeah, I'm sure you'll start to see a little bit more of it because the boards are all telling people to be more efficient. So I'm sure this is not the last time you'll hear some flavor of this, but yeah, we were fortunate enough to kind of get ahead of it. Yeah.
Totally. I think, yeah, something that you said really resonated, which is really you didn't need to. And people don't do things that are different and take a risk like this was a risk if you don't need to. And you need
Yep.
to try new things when those external pressures are there. And I think that's kind of a really interesting sign of the times, right?
I mean, if in 2021 you took $100 million check at like a 30, 40, 50x valuation, like the level at which you had to grow or you have to grow in the next couple years is, I mean, software companies are feeling this, but you had to grow like crazy, and like capacity is like the only way to kind of do it, right? And I would argue some of those companies don't even have the TAM or SAM to actually execute on what their growth targets are. So we were also fortunate enough where we didn't have that crazy you got to grow 400% at $50 million in order to hit your valuation target. So yeah, I think that's going to change here pretty quickly too. So
Totally. Seeing a lot of that for sure. Awesome, Dustin. Well, to switch gears before we wrap up, we're going to hit a few rapid fire questions if you're up for it. We're going to ask for one word or one sentence answers. Are you ready?
yes.
All right. What do you think the main reason most revenue teams would miss their ARR targets? Most common reason?
uh Lack of coaching.
Lack of coaching. It's on brand. Favorite resource related to revenue leadership? Could be a book, a course, a podcast.
Huge fan of Mark Robert's sales acceleration formula. I listen to, or I pay attention to a lot of the things he does, and then I um spend a lot of time talking to a small group of peers that I've been really fortunate to be around. But the in terms of books, and then the uh, yeah, that's probably the two that I do the most. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Those are great ones. Yeah. Check out Mark Roberge's book. Yeah. The Sales Acceleration Forum. I have somewhere up on here. I don't know if you can make out the book title there,
Yep.
but somewhere there. What do you think the number one challenge for revenue leaders going into 2024 is?
Yeah, they're really can they meet the growth expectations with the framework that they have? This shift in valuation is presenting some challenges for revenue leaders, and I would say, can they convince the organization that they should reorient around a target that's a stretch target, but also realistic? Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. The efficiency milestones have shifted exponentially. It's not as easy anymore for sure. Your favorite segment to focus on, SMB, mid-market, or enterprise?
If you'd asked me this question 5 years ago, I'd have said SMB. I would say the the more I get into, or the longer I am in my career, the upmarket deals are the ones that are exciting because you're solving big problems. But even every once in a while, I still like to get the transactional kind of my operational engineering mindset goes well in a transactional environment. So yeah, but the solving big problems for big companies is also really exciting.
Totally. This is gonna be a tricky one.
Mhm.
Most important organization on the revenue team, sales, CS, or marketing?
Ooh. Um, yeah, I think CS is becoming a very close second. I know our retention really, really helped us this year, but I think I'm always going to be a sales leader. I'm always going to be have sit in the sales corner because I do believe that efficient revenue is the lifeblood of a company. I can
Mhm.
tell you going forward with CAC being so important, how all those three organizations align is going to be way more important than it ever has been. So, um, yeah, not to throw marketing under the bus, but sales is well is number one in my heart at least.
Revenue does solve all problems. Well, so does pipeline. But
Yeah,
last one, best way to unplug from the demands of leadership.
yeah, it's a really good question. I spend a lot of time making sure that take care of myself. So just making sure in the morning I have a good routine. Um, I find that like consistency across that is something that's really helped me. I mean, it might not be like unplugged, but feel good throughout the whole time. And then, yeah, I think you always got to take some time to spend with your family and friends and travel a little bit. So that's the other way I kind of check out. So yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Can't obsess over this stuff too much. And yeah, gotta have a life outside of it
Yeah.
to recharge, right?
Nice.
Um, Awesome. Well, really appreciate it. This was a super insightful conversation. I think a way of looking at building teams that is super unique, but also, like you said, kind of might not be surprising if this is how we're reorienting instead of just how do you fill heads for capacity's sake, and really be thoughtful around how we're going to hit our efficiency targets first, and those growth numbers second. So, Dustin, appreciate you taking the time to share this with the community, and yeah, excited to hear everyone's feedback after we put this out.
Awesome. Ross, great to chat with you and looking forward to further conversations. So thanks for having me on.